Hear the wisdom nuggets from Mayuresh, Kothari. Thank you and welcome.
Good day, everyone. My name is Mayuresh Kothari, and I'm the Global Solution Lead for Secureworks Stages. And I'm going to be talking to you about the global threat landscape today and how Secureworks can help you. Starting with the way we collect intelligence itself. Now, obviously, Secureworks and many other cybersecurity organizations that assist organizations such as yourself to provide threat intelligence. There are multitude of sources and from where we gather our threat intelligence. One of the biggest advantage, however, that Secureworks has is the two main areas from where we get threat intelligence is our incident response team, which you can see with that little red arrow, which shows almost 1,500 incident response engagements per year, and through our MSSP platform, through which we deliver cybersecurity services to our customers, which process around 2.8 trillion events per week. Now, these are just two of the many sources that you see here on the screen, which gives us information about different threat actors across the globe. These could be our original research, which is done by our cyber threat researchers who are part of our counter threat unit team. We've got the different capabilities that we deliver as a consulting engagement, things like penetration testing, red team testing, etc., which allows us to identify some of the tactics that threat actors might be using. We've got a malware analysis team, which do things like reverse engineering of malware to identify what were the tools and techniques that were used by threat actors themselves. We also have strategic relationships with different government and law enforcement entities, things like Department of Justice, FBI, Interpol, etc., that allows us to makes us privy to information that helps us analyze the threat actor itself. And then we've got presence in the deep and dark web, where we look at these underground marketplaces, we look at these chat rooms and keep track of some of the chatter that is happening. And all of that massive amount of intelligence is processed in our threat intelligence management platform. And this allows us to disseminate that across to our customers in different manner. But the biggest challenge today is keeping up with these threat actors. Now, if you were to look at just the incident response data over the past year of 2021, we can break down the different engagements that we were involved in into three main buckets. First one, being the biggest bucket, is the organized crime. You can see that it's almost 80% of all incident response engagements that we did were related to organized crime, or basically e-crime, where ranging from ransomware to business email compromise to data theft, etc., we were able to identify and then assist our customers to expel these threats from their environments. However, one thing that is important to note is that these may appear to be individual type of activities. A lot of times these are not. These are related to each other, sometimes feeding off of each other. And this is what makes it a very complex mechanism to respond to. The second bucket is the insider threat, which accounts for around 15% of all incident response engagements that we did. These could be malicious or negligent insiders or contractors, which led to either data loss or a compromise in the organization itself. And then the last and the smallest percentage, being 5%, were the nation state actors, where because of geopolitical nature of the activity or the engagements, we are obviously hearing a lot of it in the European side of things today because of the Ukraine and Russian conflict. Or it could be things that we've seen here in the past, let's say where I am based at in Middle East, where we've seen a lot of nation state actors trying to compromise critical national infrastructure of neighboring countries. So that accounted to around 5% of all threats. Now, if we were to look at how we look at the intelligence that we gather on the basis of what is its impact versus how likely it is to happen, here are some indicators that can define it. So you can see that the blue circles are basically the different activities that a threat actor might accomplish in order to compromise the organization. You would notice that something like a nation state actor is highly destructive, but it is very least likely to happen. Whereas something like crypto mining or even post-intrusion ransomwares are very likely to happen, but you can see the difference in the kind of impact it may have. Now, the other aspect of this is that we've got the precursor activities, which are as important to identify, because if we are able to stop these threat actors at these precursors, we are possibly able to prevent these attacks from proliferating or causing damage. So things like remote access trojans or network intrusions going undetected, or being able to detect network intrusions in time. And then the critical vulnerability exploits for zero-day or end-day vulnerabilities. Right? So this is how we prioritize intelligence and then create countermeasures or reports for the same threat itself. Now, if I were to look at it from the African perspective, we cannot ignore the financially motivated cyber criminals and how they have tried to attack different types of organizations. But at the end of the day, it's always going to be looking for a payday. Right? We've seen attacks on the critical national infrastructure and government entities of South Africa. But the one that comes to mind is the Kaseya ransomware attack, which we saw impact globally organizations everywhere. And what this was basically is it was sort of a third party that got compromised, and which led to a lot of service provider engagements that third party was delivering to get compromised. And this led to the ransomware demand, which was sort of one of the first, where the ransomware negotiations were done across the different organizations that were compromised. So at the end of the day, we need to understand that if there is a way to make money, cyber criminals will definitely try to make that money out of it. So if we look at just the ransomware itself and how it has evolved to where it is today, we can look at it as a business model almost. And we've seen it proliferate into what initially was just a single activity to what can be seen as a 4-tier approach to the attack. What we see first begins with the post-intrusion attack, where once the intrusion has been achieved, there is some kind of compromise that happens, which then opens the organization to a name and shame kind of scenario, where someone will say that, hey, if you don't pay us, we'll leak that your data is available, it has been compromised, and it's available on these leak websites. The second could be that it could be a ransomware itself, wherein something gets encrypted, data is not accessible, or infrastructure is not accessible, and you have to pay. Or it could be that in order to access the data, you need to pay money, right? So all of that is sort of the triple extortion kind of scenario. And then finally, despite having paid ransom, there have been occasions where even then the leak happens and it's leaked to the public, which could cause further impact to the organization itself. So this is kind of the approach that a lot of cyber threat actors have taken when it comes to ransomware itself. And that's how it has evolved over time. And we have n number of examples of how 1, 2, or all of these kind of scenarios have been exercised by the threat actor. Now, in order to understand why this happens, we have to understand the ecosystem itself. So it's usually not one threat actor, but rather 2 or 3 different threat actors that are involved in these kind of attacks. The first being the operators and developers. These are the most savvy people and the smart people of the cybercrime business, so to speak, who are the ones who actually own the business. They are the ones who develop the ransomware, they write the software, they have the decryption mechanisms available for whoever does pay the ransom, and they provide either private or a ransomware as a service kind of offering in the deep dark web. Next are the affiliates. These are the less sort of savvy, but equally deadly organizations which are partners to the ransomware developers, but they are selected on the basis of how good they are, how competent they are. And just like any business that we would want to partner with the best people, the ransomware operators also like to partner with the best possible affiliates. The affiliates are the ones who filter out the targets, who identify and deploy the ransomware, and they also are responsible for stealing data and then trying to market it out for further financial gain. And then last but not the least are the initial access brokers. These are the ones who are probably doing and taking the most risk. They are the ones who are trying to infiltrate or intrude on a network. These are the ones who will create and exploit those zero-day vulnerabilities and then sell that access to the affiliates. A lot of times, whenever we see any law enforcement action being taken, a lot of times it is against these initial access brokers because these are the ones who take the most risk, right? And here's just a sort of a playbook of how a threat actor would use the ransomware name and shame playbook. So they would gain access through RDP or whatever. They would consolidate or establish their presence. They will identify what is important data and try to exfiltrate it out. Once they do that, they then prepare that organization's network for further attacks by, gaining access to critical infrastructure or Active Directory servers, etc. They will find the data that's important, encrypt it, and then start the negotiation, which is almost done at a business level. And then obviously there are the other activities that happen. So the point being is, if we were to look at some of these activities from our past experience and look at what were the most common initial access vectors, they were exploitation of remote services and RDP. What this tells is that it's not always the smart attackers who get through. It's basically the attackers who are very, very opportunistic, who find an opening and they exploit it. So the lesson here is that we should not make it easy for them, right? It should be their hardest. They should be trying their hardest to get into an organization, and threat actors are as lazy as the next person. So they don't want to expend too much effort in order to compromise or get to a particular target. Now, the three ransomware access methods that we talked about were credential abuse on either RDP or credentials that are purchased from leaked databases, or third-party credentials that were compromised in some other way. Second is the commodity malware. Someone clicks on something they shouldn't have, a malware gets deployed, and that access is then sold to a ransomware third party. And then exploitation of remote services, which we've seen a lot in the past because of COVID, obviously, where a lot of organizations had to pivot to remote work, open up their firewalls for access from outside, and thus enabling threat actors to also get a peep into the kind of security controls that an organization may have. So if I were to give an example of a recent incident response engagement where ransomware was involved, here's the flow of how it happened. A user in that legal organization Googled for a document and was redirected to a server which was already compromised. He downloaded a zip file which contained a JavaScript, which in turn was a Cobalt Strike payload. Once the payload was deployed, built-in tools were used to exfiltrate data out. It then disabled the AV on that particular machine and then deployed the ransomware. So hack and leak, data exfiltration, as well as ransomware. So almost the triple threat that we see when it comes to ransomware itself. And you can see it took 14 days from start to end for the threat actor to be present in the environment, deploy, and take advantage of the compromise itself. So you can see how the flow of this threat was. So if I were to summarize what we just heard today, how is it and what does all of this mean to your business? What it means is that the first significant risk that an organization has is the threat landscape itself is pretty active and it's constantly evolving and shifting, which means that despite the threat actors and the players being the same over time as an organization, the techniques that they use to achieve or to compromise or to compromise an organization are constantly evolving and changing. Second is that ransomware itself has changed into a business model, and therefore a lot of this has affected the way in which the threat actors are behaving, and governments are being pressured to take action. And this could lead to collateral damage. The third bit is that it requires, in order to be staying safe from these kind of threats, we need to be continuously reviewing the threat detection and management capabilities in the organization and have the visibility to respond to such kind of threats. And then the last risk is that the focus must be to make it very, very, or as difficult as possible for the threat actor to compromise the business in question. If we are a hard target, we will be the last one to be compromised as opposed to being the first ones, right? So continuously hone the security program. With that, the final couple of things that we'd like to recommend is, and these are the recommendations from our IR that we did, starting with ensuring that you know what kind of vulnerabilities exist and then prioritize on fixing those. Email remains to be one of the most common ways in which organizations get compromised. So ensure that emails, email domains, etc., and all the necessary security controls are present. Ensure that you have enough preventative controls, because preventive controls definitely takes care of almost 90% of threats. But you also need to ensure that there is visibility to detect things that you cannot prevent all the time. And that visibility ensures that you can stay ahead of threats, identify those precursors to threat activity so that you can respond to them in time. With that, I hope you enjoyed this session. If you have any questions, you can always raise them with Secureworks. There are multiple ways in which you can reach out to us. And I'd like to thank you for giving me the time today. And with that, I'll close my presentation.